everybody, it's Zach here. Welcome back to Clapperboard, where I'll be doing another movie review. This time I'm going to be reviewing Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner 2049 stars Ryan Gosling, Harrison Ford, Ana de Armas, Sylvia, Hoeks, Robin Wright, and Jared Leto. It's directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it revolves around a replicant Blade Runner called K, played by Ryan Gosling, who after retiring an older android, discovers evidence that a dead female replicant could have given birth, something that was thought to have been impossible. After further investigation, he finds evidence of childhood memories he believed to be fake, revealing that he could be the son of this dead replicant, and not a machine after all. Okay guys, I would just like to clarify before I start this review, I love Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. The original Blade Runner, which came out in the 80s, I've actually got it on Blu-ray at home, and it is one of a kind. Because it's just such an eerie and interesting experience watching it, and sort of addressing the sort of consequences of humanity and what we're doing to the world, and also our advances in technology and artificial intelligence. And it's 2017 right now. In the original Blade Runner, it still holds up today. And when I heard that they were going to be making a sequel to it, I was actually quite worried, because I didn't want them to mess it up. But when this film came out, and it got released like a couple of days ago, and the reviews started coming out and they started saying that it was as good as the original, maybe even better, I had high hopes for it. I was actually really looking forward to it. And so today, I went to watch it. I saw it with my friend. It was the opening day today, opening day in New Zealand, and I went to see it. And I can confirm to you that Blade Runner 2049 is a really, really good movie, guys. It's not just a movie. It's an experience, and I really loved it. It was very much like the first Blade Runner movie, but it was also very, very different. It was similar, but in its own unique way. They've updated it, they've, added more stuff to it, they've expanded the world, expanded the, the premise, but they've kept it in the similar vibes that the original one from the 80s had, and I had a ball with it in terms of so many things, and my friend really enjoyed it too, and the reviews have been really great, and I can overall confirm that yes, it is one of the better films this year. So I'll first off get out of the way any sort of negatives I had with the film, because I had very few negatives. There were very few things to really, really properly dislike about the film, and the one negative I did have in this film was the fact that Harrison Ford's character, Rick Deckard, who was the main character in the original Blade Runner, he only appears in the last third of the movie, and to some people, and it's not necessarily a big deal, and to a lot of people, that's perfectly fine, and, to me, that's also perfectly fine, but one of the biggest selling points of this movie, and, it's all over the trailers, the posters, the banners, stuff like that, it all featured Harrison Ford returning as, Rick Deckard, the character. And, if you're gonna put him on the main poster, you would kind of imagine he would have a bit more of a major role than he had, because his role, it's major, but it's kind of downgraded in a sense. It's not a huge role, and ultimately, most of the screen time towards the characters are given to other ones, which isn't necessarily a big deal, but if you're going to feature him in the majority of the trailers and stuff like that, you might want to give him a bit more of a bigger role. Aside from that, there's really nothing really to overly complain about this movie, guys. It is a spectacle. And so, I'll start off with what I usually start off with, the acting. I'll start off with Ryan Gosling. Ryan Gosling, I've seen him before, I've seen him in movies before, and his character, called K, is basically, because in this new world of Blade Runner, because of course the original took place in 2019, this one takes place in 2049, in this new world, replicants have been accepted into today's society, and Ryan Gosling's character, K, is basically, he's a replicant, and he is also a Blade Runner, so he's basically tracking down older versions of replicants and quote-unquote retiring them, killing them essentially. He played it perfectly, in my opinion. He plays exactly how a machine with emotions or maybe, do they have emotions? But he plays how a machine, which apparently has emotions, he plays it exactly how it should be played. He plays it kind of cold and emotionless and very sort of poker-faced sometimes, and then at other times, it can really be quite wrenching. His performance grew really heart-wrenching, especially in those moments where he's discovering that he may actually be a human. He may have had a mother. He might not just have been built in some sort of facility. He may actually be an actual thing that could have been bred. But then again, and that is addressing the overall Blade Runner, theme, what is human? What makes us human? Do machines dream of electric sheep? That sort of thing. And, his performance really did convey that. And it is definitely, in terms of his character, one of the highlights. Harrison Ford once again returns as Rick Deckard, and his performance in this one is much different to his performance in the first movie. In the original Blade Runner, he's quite serious, he's quite, stern, but he sort of has that kind of Han Solo, when he played Han Solo in Star Wars, he still has that kind of cockiness and sense of humor and wit to him. In this movie, you don't really get that. He's much more graver, he's much more, gravelly. He's definitely a haunted character, a very scarred, emotionally scarred, traumatized person who's really sort of wrenched by his past. And his performance, it really grips you in moments. The rest of the actors, such as Armas and Jared Leto and all of the rest of them, they do really well with their performances. They can be really emotional at moments. They can be quite threatening at moments when they need to be, especially Jared Leto. Now, Jared Leto, I've seen him in Suicide Squad. He wasn't horribly good as the Joker. I mean, he wasn't awful, but I just could not take him seriously in Suicide Squad as the Joker. This film, as a villain, I could take him much more seriously. I should also mention the performance of Ana de Armas, who plays essentially his sort of roommate partner, Kay's roommate partner. And she is essentially like this holographic projection thing, this sort of like computer program who, is artificially intelligent and feels emotions. And, it's interesting. It reminded me very much of the character of Roy, who was a replicant that Rick was hunting down in the original Blade Runner. And, he was so good in Blade Runner, especially at that very moment where, he appears to, die when he was at the, I guess you could say die, at the end of his lifeline, and, he goes, all those memories will be lost like tears in the rain, and, that moment where it's like, oh my gosh, this thing, this machine can really feel emotions. It's kind of similar with, Ana de Armas' character, Joey, as well. That was her name, Joey. There were moments where it's like, wow, she feels emotions, but does she feel emotions? Because she's a computer program, like a hologram. And that is also another thing I need to address in the film. For those of you guys who were worried that Blade Runner 2049 is a repeat of the first movie, it's not a repeat of the first movie. Don't get me wrong, it keeps things kind of similar to the first movie in terms of its themes and stuff like that, of, what makes us human, what makes us machine, that sort of thing. But it does them in a very different way. It's similar, but in a very, very, very different way. And that is ultimately why I think people are saying this is one of the better sequels of, all time, because it keeps things familiar, but it's not just a retread of the first movie. It's not a repeat, and that's one of the things that I really liked about it. But one of the things I should address is that this movie is very complex, and I came out of this movie kind of a bit puzzled, to say the least. And that, depending on your point of view, that may be a bad thing, that may be a good thing. To me, it was a bit of both. And we were actually talking to this woman who was, me and my friend were talking to this woman who was in the theatre with us, and she was going like, did you guys understand that? Because she could not get her head around the story and stuff like that, and my friend couldn't really get his head around it as well, and I actually couldn't either. As soon as I got out of the theatre, I was like, I'm going to have to think about that to wrap my head around it. And for those of you guys who don't take in a lot of heavy information, which sometimes I don't take in a lot of heavy information, well, that could be a bit of a problem with this movie. And, again, depending on some people, that could be a good thing, the obscurity of the plot and stuff like that. It kind of reminded me of the first Matrix movie. The first Matrix movie, which is a film that I absolutely love, I didn't really get that the first time I watched it, and then I watched it a second time, and it just clicked for me. So maybe that will be the same thing with this one, Blade Runner 2049. And that is ultimately what a good movie should do. A good movie should be thought-provoking. A good movie should make you think about, what does that mean? Or maybe that thing could mean something else. Or maybe this philosophy really does relate to me. And, that is ultimately what this movie does. And it really makes you want to understand this world. And if a movie makes you want to understand the world and the story that is trying to tell, it's clearly got you hooked. And that is the same thing with the first movie. It's the same thing with this movie. And that is ultimately another one of the reasons why I really like this, because it got me involved and I wanted to understand what was going on, even the really complex stuff. The movie also started off really familiar because we know from the first Blade Runner movie that Rick was basically going around trying to get rid of these androids who weren't allowed on Earth. But our main character, he's retiring older androids, and it started off very familiar. The film started off in this really sort of eerie, abandoned, sort of farmland area, futuristic farmland area at that, and we basically see Kay trying to retire this android, and it was pretty brutal. It was pretty brutal and realistic, guys. And it overall established that really sort of familiar sense of the first Blade Runner movie of going, oh yeah, I remember that from the first movie. Another one of the things I noticed about this movie is it's long. Really, really long. My friend and I went into the movie at about 11:30 in the morning, and we came out at about 2:30 in the afternoon. It's a long movie, guys. And I remember halfway through the movie, I was thinking, we haven't seen Rick Deckard, Harrison Ford's character. We haven't seen him yet, and yet we've probably been watching this movie for 2 hours. And for those of you guys who are generally quite fidgety in theatres, I would recommend you watch this movie more in your own time, like, when it comes out on DVD and stuff, or in an empty theatre, because generally, this movie, not only is it long, but you generally, it's the sort of movie you need to watch if you have a lot of patience, such as myself, because a lot of it isn't like a big action movie and stuff like that. It's very similar to the first movie, where the characters are sort of going around, walking about the world, contemplating, their place in society, and contemplating, the sort of themes of artificial intelligence. And the movie, it is very much a sort of slow-paced movie. It's not a fast-paced action movie. It is generally quite slow, and it works for the length of time it's got. But that's just a heads up for those of you guys expecting to see a fast-paced action movie, because it's not like that. Also, addressing the more technical aspects of this film, the musical score, it was very haunting. It was very sort of background music. It wasn't the sort of music you'd want to essentially buy and listen to on, like iTunes and stuff like that. It's more of the sort of like underscore type thing. Very synth heavy, very electronic, very, dark and boom, boom, boom sort of thing. Not the sort of like, score with themes and melodies and all of those sort of reoccurring tunes going through. It's very much an underscore with a lot of, sharp ambient noises, and it's a good score, don't get me wrong, but it's not the sort of thing you're going to want to listen to on a daily basis, because it's the sort of really subtle underscore sort of thing, and it is very similar to the score from the first Blade Runner movie. Also, speaking of the technical aspects of this movie is rated R13, and even for an R13 movie, I thought that this movie went, in terms of the action and the violence and the gore, and not just that, but also the kind of more, adultish, raunchy stuff, this movie went full on, actually, and I was quite surprised, because in terms of the action and stuff, it's brutal. There were some moments where it went for that more PG-13 vibe, but mostly it doesn't go for that sort of BS PG-13 rating. It is very violent, very bloody, very gory, especially in some particular moments, which I won't spoil for you guys. And there's also some rather, raunchy, more adultish moments where they go full on, you'll have to watch the movie to get what I mean, because I don't really want to talk about it on my channel, but just to sum it all up, I was really surprised to see how adultish they went with some things in this movie, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but just for an R13 movie, I was actually quite surprised to see how far they were willing to go in some places with that sort of thing. And also, this is the thing that I'm going to be going on and on and on about for weeks after watching this movie. The visual effects and the world building. This movie was a spectacle to behold. I loved the look of this movie. And I would like to clarify, I love the look of the first Blade Runner movie. The first Blade Runner movie came out in like the 1980s and it still holds up today. And it's amazing how they didn't use CGI, and yet the first Blade Runner movie looks extraordinary. How they combined all those different models and all those different matte paintings and all those different, you know, practical non-CGI techniques to create this amazing, fleshed out, expansive, dystopian, futuristic world that in 2017 still holds up and looks amazing. The original Blade Runner was directed by Ridley Scott. This one was directed by Denis Villeneuve, and you can tell that Villeneuve, he stayed true to Ridley Scott's vision. He stayed very respectful to what Ridley Scott created in the original movie, but he's definitely expanded what we saw in the original movie. Because the original movie took place in the sort of downtown LA area with sort of very Hong Kong style architecture with a lot of neon, a lot of holograms, and a lot of all that cool futuristic dystopian stuff. This movie has a lot of that, but it also takes place in other areas outside of LA where you get to see, you know, the rubbish dumps and you get to see the big artificial farms and stuff like that. The movie looked amazing, guys. It's CGI, and to be honest, I don't even know if it was CGI. I mean, sure, there's CGI in the film, that's for sure. There is CGI, but I guarantee you a lot of the effects, what you see, were real, actual, practical models that they have, and they actually built the models, and they built the matte paintings, and then they blended it in with CG elements. And it looks absolutely extraordinary, guys. I was blown away. It's awe-inspiring. There were shots in this movie where I was just going, you know, this is what futuristic movies should look like. And Blade Runner 2049, this is what blockbusters, Hollywood blockbusters these days, this is what they need to look like, guys. This is what they should look like right now. And I guess the perfect example of explaining that is when I saw the trailer for the new Thor movie, which is, by the way, being directed by Taika Waititi, a New Zealand director. And I love Taika Waititi, guys. I love his films. But when I watched the Thor trailer, the trailer for the new Thor movie, I looked at the CGI for the Hulk and all of the special effects and stuff like that. And when I watch, like, Marvel movies and most DC movies and stuff like that, aside from Wonder Woman, but when I look at a lot of superhero movies these days, I look at the special effects and go, oh, nice glossy CGI animations, guys, you know, looks cool, but I still don't buy it. Even in films like Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which have stunning visuals, I still don't buy that they're real. They still look really like glossy CGI animations. Blade Runner 2049 is a perfect example of what Hollywood blockbusters right now should look like, and I had an absolute blast looking at the world building in this movie, and the visual effects, and the CGI. It is incredible, guys. And the CGI in this movie was done by Weta Digital, which is a New Zealand company based in Wellington. And for those of you guys who don't know, I live in Wellington, in New Zealand, so that's a perfect example of why you gotta hire Weta Digital to do your CGI, guys, because most of their CGI looks pretty damn amazing, aside from some CGI in some movies. Cough cough, The Hobbit. So, overall, guys, that basically concludes my review on Blade Runner 2049. What I'm trying to say here is, yes, it is one of the best sequels I've seen. Yes, it's respectful to the original. Yes, it does something different. Yes, it is really that great. And yes, it is one of the better films of 2017. From the morals, to the story, to the characters, to the visual effects, everything in this movie is mostly pitch perfect. And overall, this film is a must-see for any science fiction fan, any fan of the first movie, any moviegoer, any film critic, or basically anybody who wants some bloody great entertainment. Overall, I give Blade Runner 2049 a solid 5 out of 5. Did you watch Blade Runner 2049? If you haven't, just go see it. Just go see it. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, as your opinions really mean a lot to me. I'll hopefully see you in another video very soon. Until then though, take care.